Hi, I'm Nick. Welcome to the Tax.Pro Show. I'm a tax pro with over 20 years experience in tax and payroll, and today we're going to talk about ministers opting out of Social Security and what that means and the tax implications behind that. If you are a newly ordained minister within the past couple of years, you have the ability to opt out of FICA tax, Social Security and Medicare. There's a several multi-step process to get that done. There's a bunch of rules behind it. You do have to have it's called a religious exemption. There's some other organizations that have that exemption or the ability to have that exemption. Amish is one that comes right off the top of my head. That is one that you can absolutely opt out of Social Security and Medicare. What does that mean? So on wages earned in the U.S., a portion of your Social Security and Medicare is withheld from the employee, and that's the employee contribution. The employer also contributes, and those two combined numbers is about 15.3% of your wages up to the first $184,500. For most people with ministers, it's a little bit different. It's about $170,000 on ministers, but still, it's quite a bit of money that gets contributed to Social Security and Medicare. And that originally was to go to fund future retirement, but ministers have the option, if they have a religious deterrent or avoidance to contributing to something like that, they can opt out of those taxes. What does that mean? First off, nobody's contributing that 15.3% to Social Security. Nobody's contributing that to Medicare. It is split between Social Security and Medicare. So if your only job is ministerial income after you're ordained, then you would not receive any Social Security or Medicare benefits at full retirement age. The flip side to that is if you took that same 15.3% and invested it privately, whether it's through a 401k, a 403b, Roth IRAs, retirement accounts of some form or fashion, you could have a probably significantly larger retirement than what you would get from Social Security. Just this last week, the Board of Trustees for Social Security released a report saying that they expect that Social Security principal fund will be fully depleted in the next 6 to 7 years. That means that for most people, retirement benefits will go down. For most retirees, your benefits would drop, and they say on average it would drop about $500 a month per person. So if you've got a retired couple, you both getting Social Security benefits, your income could go down $1,000 a month. That's if you're on Social Security, and that's starting just in the next 6 to 7 years from what they're saying now. Now, there's been doom and gloom prophecies over Social Security and when it's going to collapse and things like that for a long time. I don't expect a collapse. I expect Congress to make some changes to help fund that, but that's what we're looking at now without any other Congress interventions. So as a minister, you have the option to opt out of that system. And if you do that, it's only for your ministerial income. So what you'd be paid by the church for preaching, for weddings, funerals, things like that. Any type of income related to being a minister that you get paid for, you can opt out. That means that you're not paying that money into Social Security and Medicare. If you don't do anything with it, then when you get to full retirement age, you're screwed. If you don't have another 401k or 403b or some other retirement plan in place, independently wealthy and don't need it, you're going to have some problems there. So what we recommend is if you are going to opt out, that you invest that 15.3%. You take 15% of your income that would otherwise go to Social Security and Medicare and put it in retirement accounts or investment accounts and let that money grow. Find a really good advisor and look at what that would take to actually have a nice retirement. How does that work? First off, you have to do it within a certain amount of time, and it's roughly 2 years, give or take. It depends on, it's 2 years after your first tax return filed as an ordained minister, more or less. And what that means is you file a form with the IRS. You send an application in saying, hey, I'm opting out, and here's my reasons. I'm an ordained minister. And they then review that application, and then they send you a letter back. And that letter is not the confirmation. A lot of people miss this step. And so it's very important you don't, because until you finish the whole process, you haven't opted out. They send you a letter back, and it says, hey, we received your application. It says you want to opt out. Do you really want to do this? If you do, sign this form and mail it back to us. That is the second step on minister's part. First is the application. Second is, yes, confirmation, I do want to do this. And that goes back to IRS. They then send out another form, and they send this form to you. They will only send it once. They will not recreate it. They will not redo this. They do not keep a copy of it in their file necessarily. What it means is that form is your get out of Social Security form. Our recommendation, you give a copy of that to your Tax.Pro that they can keep on file with your permanent file. If IRS ever questions whether or not you opted out of Social Security, and it could be 3 years down the road, it could be 10 years down the road, it could be 30 years down the road, you have to provide a copy of that form to prove that you opted out and that IRS accepted it. If you cannot prove that, then you're automatically opted back in, subject to all those wages and you're paying in and things like that. So it is important, if you're going to opt out, you follow the whole process and do it correctly. Once you do that, you will not have Social Security and Medicare tax on your personal return. With ministers, it's called SECA tax or FICA tax, self-employment tax. They're all basically the same thing. And what that means is that tax is not something you'll pay into the government at the end of the year or with estimated tax payments throughout. What it does mean is whatever amount that should, again, 15%, you really should invest and invest wisely, and that will take care of your retirement in your future and gives you the ability to be the master of your own destiny. Now, there are a few things to watch for. So that is strictly for Social Security tax, Social Security and Medicare, and opting out of that. If you have another job on the side, if you worked in the private or public sector before, a non-minister income is still subject to Social Security and Medicare. That exemption only applies to ministerial income. So if you have another job, if you had a job in the past, you would have already paid in. If you leave and go work somewhere else full time, all those wages would be subject to Social Security and Medicare. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're fully opted out of the system. It just means that a certain portion of your income is. The other thing with that is that only opts you out of Social Security and Medicare tax. It does not opt you out of income tax. Income tax still applies, and income tax applies to all ministerial, all other income. And where people get a little bit confused on some of this is housing allowance. A lot of ministers have the ability to have a designated housing allowance. What is that? It's a super cool thing. A portion of their wages paid by the church could be designated as a housing allowance. And a housing allowance is actually exempt from federal income tax, as long as it's reasonable and there's a bunch of guidelines behind that. But if you include those, most churches that do this and do this well, it's something that you would turn in either end of the year, early in the year. This is what our housing allowance would be. So let's say your total compensation package is $70,000 a year, and you could designate 20 of it as legitimate housing allowance expenses. The church could then pay you $20,000 as housing allowance, $50,000 as regular wages. If you've opted out of Social Security, all of it would be opted out of Social Security, but your housing allowance is also additionally exempt from federal income tax. There's a couple of forms that you've got to add to your return. It is a little bit on the complicated side in working through that and making sure it's done correctly. But again, there's a pretty big payoff to be able to exempt a portion of your income from income tax. There's a lot of ways that this could actually play out. For the most part, hugely advantageous to pastors. It's a really cool thing that we're able to do, but it's got to be done correctly. And that's super important that you work with a seasoned tax pro, somebody that knows minister income, that knows clergy income, that knows how the housing allowance works. And especially if you're new to the ministry, you're recently ordained, or you're going to be ordained soon, we strongly encourage you to reach out, have a conversation with your tax pro. Talk to them about your situation, what it looks like. Is this a good idea? We also recommend you get connected with a trusted advisor for retirement planning and investment planning, so that you know that your savings, your retirement, all of that stuff is on track. You're making progress going forward. You know what your tax liabilities would be. You know your tax situation, and you're able to plan very successfully and very well for your future. Question that comes up fairly often is whether or not you can rely on your church's payroll department to do this correctly. And that's a big fat it depends. Payroll tax law is pretty complex. It's one of the more complex area of the tax law. And clergy or minister payroll is even more complex. We strongly recommend that you take your pay stubs, take your information to a tax pro that knows what's going on with this and have them look at it. Your medium-sized churches, or somebody that, again, large ones, anyone that outsources to a professional for payroll services, it's probably accurate, but again, still check it. Make sure it's correct. If it's not correct, get with your elders, get with your board, and find out what could be done, what needs to be done to get it fixed. Oftentimes, it is best to outsource payroll to an experienced payroll company that knows what they're doing, a payroll service bureau that is willing to help, willing to teach, and knows the ins and outs of church payroll to make sure that your payroll is actually correct, your W-2s are correct, and your tax return is correct, and everything's reported correctly. Okay, fake church, fake minister tax schemes. The IRS and legal commentators have repeatedly warned about people creating sham churches or minister arrangements to avoid taxes, claim improper housing allowance, or dodge self-employment taxes. These schemes tend to collapse under audit because merely calling yourself a minister or creating a church entity doesn't automatically qualify you for clergy tax treatment. Don't commit fraud. That's pretty straightforward. And even a line in here, dodge self-employment taxes. Tax evasion is criminal offense. You don't want to do that. This is a terrible idea. First off, creating a fake church. Create a fake church. Man, so many things about that are wrong. That's probably between you and Jesus, and he's probably going to frown on that, be my guess. Creating a fake church in order to have a fake minister and a fake ordination in order to get paid improperly and avoid taxes. Bad idea. That's a really bad idea. That's a quick way to go to jail, and you're literally tax evasion. That's exactly what this would be. Don't do that. Number one, it actually takes some effort to set all this stuff up, and you'd probably be better off just making more money, working harder, and paying your taxes. How often is this not done correctly? It's pretty rare that we have a new minister come in, or new to us, that it's been done correctly. It's often, a lot of the assumption is just because it doesn't necessarily, or it appears on the W-2, doesn't mean it has to go on the tax return, or vice versa. W-2s are often not correct, and that's something that we have to correct on tax returns. One of the things that you can't fix after your time frame has run on opting out of Social Security and Medicare, once that time frame is run, you're done. You can opt back in. You can file some stuff to opt back in if you've opted out, but you can't opt out once that time frame is run. So if you wait 5 years trying to make a decision, you've lost that window. You don't have that opportunity to opt out. But when it comes to housing allowance and clergy taxes, more often than not, we see them done incorrectly on tax returns. If you're dealing with this stuff, if you are a newly ordained minister, you're about to be ordained in the past couple of years, you have questions on this, questions on housing allowance, things like that, leave a comment below. We'd be more than happy to chat with you, see what we can do on that. And if you are wanting to set up a sham church and fake ministerial income, don't call us on that one. Just call a really good criminal defense attorney. Thanks for taking time out of your day to watch this episode and joining us as we talk about clergy taxes. We appreciate the like and follow. If you've enjoyed this episode, please absolutely like and follow it. And if you want to support the native Pimgin population in Arizona, we'd love for you to like and support this podcast and help us do that too.